on screen.
There are many great resonances about being an actor. One of my first attractions to acting was that I could forget about Patrick Stewart. To not be Patrick Stewart, if only for a few hours a week, was such a relief. And there was a price to pay for that.
The knighted Shakespearean captain of the Starship Enterprise, international treasure and master storyteller, is here in the house. And he brings with him conversational delights lifted from his 83 years of life. We have tales from his humble beginnings. We talk about how the theater saved him and how childhood trauma informed his career, which of course led us into a deep dive on mental health generally and his passion for mental health advocacy. We also talk about friendship, particularly the nature of his beautiful friendship with Sir Ian McKellen. We discuss legacy, longevity, craft, mentorship, and why Star Trek is just so indelible, which of course led to brief thoughts on UFOs and also this incredible story about the ghosts that he is absolutely convinced took up residence in his Silver Lake home. All of these stories and themes are more fully elaborated in Sir Patrick's wonderful new memoir, Making It So. As a longtime Trekkie, this one was a dream. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So here we go. This is me and Sir Patrick. You look amazing. I'm thrilled to have you here. You don't look a day older than you look in Star Trek Next Generation. I want to know what your longevity secrets are. You're so spry and with it and funny and present and fit. There's got to be some secrets.
Work.
That's it? Staying plugged in.
Well, it has been for me in that life, as opposed to work, can get quite complicated in our business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the hours are long. You could be anywhere in any corner of the world. I came from a very work-conscious background. My father was proud of what he did, even though, as you may have seen in the book, that he, the highlight of his career was Second World War. Mm-hmm. 10 years in India in the 20s. The moment he heard my mother was pregnant, he took off. And he ended his military career at the end of 1945 as a regimental sergeant major of the parachute regiment. And that meant everything to him. He was very, very proud of that. One day, a guy, just after my father had died, I met him in a pub, and he said, "I know you. You're Alf Stewart's son." And I said, "Yeah, that's right." And he said, "Your dad, you know, when he walked on a parade ground, the birds in the trees stopped singing."
What do you make of that? What does that mean?
Presence, I think. I mean, I know what it means as an actor. That I know mostly that from watching other actors. Mm-hmm. You know, somebody walks on stage and you go, "Oh my God!" Now I don't know why that happens, but there is a focus, a concentration, an intensity,
a gravitas,
objectives that make them, and other people. You forget they're there.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
No, you know those people when they walk into the room, the sense of weight and charisma and gravitas that he obviously earned. And what you just shared, has a sensibility of kind of reverence and respect for who he was. But he was a challenging guy as well. He was not an easy guy to grow up underneath.
No. I mean, he first came home when I was about 15 months old, and I have no recollection of that. And one more time, I think in 1943, he came home when I was probably 4. And I just have memories of a man in a uniform looking kind of exciting, I thought, at the time. No, the problems began when the war ended. And his colonel said, "So what are you going to do, Sergeant, when, when you get back home?" And my father said, "Oh, I'll get a job." And he said, "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." And he explained that he had contact at the Dorchester Hotel in London. Now, the Dorchester is one of the top 4 or 5 hotels, historic hotels in London.
Famous for its high tea.
That's right, yeah. Which, by the way, I recommend. If ever
I've done it once.
Have an opportunity. You've done it once.
Yeah, I have.
Good for you. Yeah, Americans love it. It's great. And he said there is a vacancy coming up in a few weeks for a doorman, an assistant doorman. But the doorman is going to be retiring in 2 years' time, and his job would be yours, Alfred. And and my father said, "Wow, that's great." And there was an apartment that came with the job in the hotel.
Wow.
They said, "You're married, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, we'll employ your wife too. She could get a job in the hotel as well." I mean, it sounded wonderful.
And
but
yet,
his wife, my mother said, "No, I'm not leaving West Yorkshire. This had been my home all her life," and it had. It had. In fact, the little town we lived in, a population of 9,000.
And it has its own wild dialect that's indecipherable to most of us, right?
Using words know like what that's talking about.
And thee and thou and like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy the way that you grew up speaking.
Yeah. I was not allowed to say thee and thou to my father, though. Whack.
Why? It was a
that was an
disrespect.
Insult. But I mean, as a child playing, and you could say to people, "Oh, thee," which was always critical in some way, or "that" was the way that we shortened it. That doesn't understand, lad. That doesn't know what they're talking about. So there was this semi-ancient speech that was ours, and in fact, I spoke a strong dialect when I was a child, and when I was 13, I had to lose it because...
Yeah. Can you bring it back at all?
My family have always told me, "Oh, you can't do Yorkshire anymore. No, you changed your accent." And I did. I learned a new accent, which was RP, received pronunciation. Classical BBC news time English. Not anymore, because now they deliberately employ people with accents, and the world has become a more relaxed and easier place in many respects. Some of them not good, and it's a better time. But back then, well, let me think of anything I could say. Okay, there's a very simple one. When I would go to a friend's house, he would open the door and I would say, "I'll leg it out." Translate that for me.
I have no idea.
Atta, art thou. Lakin, 15th century word for playing. Actors in Shakespeare's day were called lakers.
Wow.
Not
that's kind of amazing.
Not basketball
given the Los Angeles Lakers, there's a double entendre there that's super interesting.
Well, it's certainly a 14th century word. It could be older. Atta, lakin, at, out. Are you coming out to play is the translation. Wow. So it was dialect. It wasn't accent alone. I would go home to my family and they would say, "You're not a Yorkshire lad anymore, not anymore."
Disowned.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Disowned. My mother liked it because she liked to hear me speaking very, very grand. When I had an accent like this, which was very, very cultured and official and sophisticated. I don't talk like that anymore.
Right. Back to your dad a little bit. I mean, you spoke about some of the things that he did in World War II. I mean, this was a guy who, ended up, I think he airlifted out of Cherbourg, like around Dunkirk, right?
Yeah.
So this guy had done a lot.
They'd already
parachuting
evacuated
into
Dunkirk.
Crete and like doing some pretty ballsy, crazy stuff. But he comes home, finds himself back in Yorkshire, and it's pretty easy to kind of identify what was going on with him now, given what we understand about what happens with veterans when they return from conflict zones.
Yes.
But at that time, it was just shell shock. Nobody understood it. And of course, with that, there's domestic violence, there's alcohol abuse, and a whole array of sordid behaviors that you were on the kind of receiving end of as a young person.
Yes. At the hands of my father, unlike my headmaster, I didn't receive personally any violence. He would raise his hand several times, and the moment that he did that, I would freeze and become something that he wasn't going to hit. He beat my mother, and he did it in front of me and my brother, who was 5 years older than me. I was the baby of the family. And it was appalling. And I mean, I've only subsequently learned. I did a television program for the BBC quite a few years ago now, and they had a specialist of PTSD on the show, and he'd been told about my father, and then he talked to me, and he said he was ill, and if it's possible at all for you to allow that to become part of your recollection of your unpleasant childhood. He was sick and could not control himself. So it was a mental condition as much as anything. And he was angry, and I always thought that once I heard this story about the Dorchester Hotel, that he never ceased to be angry with my mother, because he knew that job would have been perfect for him. Because he was smart. He had conversation, and he could talk. He had language, and then he had this dialect, which was people loved to hear. They thought it was charming. He would have been a star standing in the front door of the Dorchester Hotel.
Yeah, so he held on to a certain resentment, took out his frustration on the people that he cared about. And it's interesting to hear you share that, because with that realization that this was an illness, that he was a victim of something he had no control over, allows you to then have compassion not only for your mother as a victim of domestic abuse, but also for the perpetrator, to have some kind of empathy for why he ended up behaving that way, which in turn gives you a certain freedom. You're liberated from holding on to your anger around that. And I know it wasn't, I don't think you shared that publicly until maybe 2010 or something like that. You held on to that for a long time. Yeah.
For a very long time. I was ashamed. And I was ashamed that I couldn't impact what was so awful about my home life. I couldn't change it.
Did you blame yourself? Yeah.
And I know that my elder brother did.
Yeah, because you were the younger. If anyone was going to feel like he needed to, make it better for you, it would be him.
Yeah.
He
was, and he only died last year. And he took care of me. And if ever I was at any risk, he would protect me. And then as I got older and I wanted to do all the things he did, play soccer with him and his friends, play cricket with him and his friends. And of course, he didn't want his kid brother to be hanging out with us at all, because he was 5 years older than me. They all were, And he nevertheless always had an eye for me. And I only went into therapy about the 90s. I'd never done it.
What was the revelation of engaging with therapy?
Well, one of the things I learned was how to listen, because she mostly listened. When she did talk, she would say tell me, how, in what way? And so that she was always inviting me to contribute the conversations. But then as my time with her, and it was for several years, went on, we began to talk about mental issues, mental disturbances, bouts of anger. I still occasionally get them. And I know where it comes from.
Yeah.
It happened only a few days ago, I'm ashamed to say. And
well, I had read that there was an article a couple of years ago that said that you're 83 now, right? At 80, you were still in therapy. Are you still in therapy now?
No, I'm not.
You're not.
Except
cured, except for the occasional angry outburst.
They don't happen very often. They're quite rare, I'm relieved to say. But no, I have 2 therapists now, but I see them when I feel that there is a need, rather than it's not a daily or weekly event for me.
I'm interested in the relationship between that childhood dynamic and your burgeoning relationship with the theater. It feels like the theater is really what saved you, finding yourself amongst a community of like-minded people at an early age becomes this true salvation for your life. And you had a couple instrumental teachers and mentors that kind of guided you and nudged you in that direction, saw something in you very early on.
There are many, for me, great resonances about being an actor. And one of the strongest is the people I encounter. Finding that there were in the world other young people, and some of them significantly older, who felt the same kind of isolation that I felt. And yet, in the company of actors, there was an almost intuitive connection that was made between us. And I was 12 years old when I first was dumped into a large group of actors on a course that was run. It was a brand new course run by the West Riding County Council in Yorkshire. And the minimum age was 14. And it was in my headmaster's office that I met a man called Gerald Tyler. He's in the book. And he had come to say that the county council were going to run an 8-day theatre course, a residential theatre course. By that it meant we had camp beds to lie on in school classrooms. But nevertheless, from the moment that I arrived there, I was in the company of people like me. Now, some of them were highly educated. I mean, I got a big crush on a girl who was at grammar school, but it didn't work out. I was at secondary modern school.
To do with you.
No. And yet, it was our love of acting, performing, of plays, scripts, texts, being in front of an audience, which never scared me, ever at all. And there was a reason for this. One of my first attractions to acting was that I could forget about Patrick Stewart.
Right. That was my next question. How much of this, aside from finding like-minded people in this tribe of young artists, how much of it was an escape from your own life, or the opportunity to step outside who you were and just become somebody altogether different as a defense mechanism and not having to deal with whatever pain is kind of lingering in your subconscious?
You explain it perfectly.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it was. To not be Patrick Stewart, if only for a few hours a week, was such a relief. To explore being someone other than myself with a different background. I mean, the first role that I played, other than this thing that we'd done about the history of Yorkshire and Murfield, where I grew up, was a comedy called The Happiest Days of Your Life. You may have encountered it. Very occasionally it crops up in theatre, very occasionally. And it was all set in a private boys' school, a rather exclusive private boys' school, and it was wartime, and a private girls' school had been found places in the school. So there were now boys and girls playing there. And I played a character, you see, I remember his name, called Hopcroft Minor. He had an older brother who was Hopcroft. And it was such a joy to be playing an upper-class child. Even though I struggled with the accent, I didn't really have a proper received pronunciation accent until I was 15 or 16. But I was learning. And sometimes it made people laugh when they heard me speak because it sounded so portentous and, you know. So becoming someone else, that was the main attraction.
Yeah.
And I could forget who Patrick Stewart was.
But not with any self-awareness around that. It's not as if you understood. I mean, a young person wouldn't be expected to understand that, oh, I'm doing this because I'm trying to, you know, get away from this other thing. But you do have a moment when you were doing the Macbeth rendering that was set in a Cold War era, where you connected the dots between your kind of actor sensibility and this character that you were inhabiting, tracing it back to your father. Do you know the story I'm referring to?
Yeah, I do. It was a great invitation to be offered that role by a wonderful actor called Rupert Gould, who was just starting out then but is now very well established in the UK. And he's done a couple of films as well. We both felt that, I mean, if you're interested in the theatre, you know who Macbeth is and what he did.
Yeah.
So we wanted to put him into a context in which what he was understandable. And that was intriguing. And I did go and talk to a lot of people and about because Macbeth is ill and gets iller as the play goes on. You remember the story I told in the book about running into Ian McKellen in the Charing Cross Road one day, and he said, "So, how's it going, Macbeth?" And oh God, I was so uncomfortable because Ian was the Macbeth of my generation. Him and Judi Dench, who played Lady Macbeth. I saw that production, and Trevor Nunn directed it, and it was amazing. And the cast just sat in a circle around a quite small studio stage and just stood up when their turn came. So it had an intimacy about it. But and then Ian said to me, if I can, there's just one thing I'd like to mention about playing Macbeth. And I said, anything at all, please. And he said, okay, the line that begins the famous speech, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. He said, the most important word in that first line is and. And I had it in a flash. I knew exactly what he meant. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty, and you're rolling, then you're rolling. And it was
He unlocked it. He unlocked it for you.
Oh, not just that speech, but it spread into the rest of the play. And I knew that Macbeth was inside me.
Mm-hmm. But it's when you dress up in the costuming of the character and look in the mirror and you have this epiphany.
Yes, yes. The first dress rehearsal, I'd grown a mustache, quite a heavyweight mustache, unlike my father's, who had a very, very narrow, small sergeant major's mustache. And I was in uniform, and it was the end of a battle. We were coming from a battle, myself and Banquo, and I had an overcoat on, and I had a military cap pulled down over my face, and a rifle slung over my shoulder. And I was just getting these things on. The dresser was helping me. And then she said, have a look in the mirror, see what you think. And my father was looking back at me. Unmistakable, him. And it gave me quite a shock. But then I saw the advantage of it. I knew him. He wasn't inside me, other than he had been my father. And that allowed me to embrace him and bring him in and feel about him both his rages and his fear and his sadness and the pain that he'd had, because he'd been wounded several times, fortunately never very seriously. But he had been wounded, and of course he jumped out of airplanes.
Yeah. Well, just fascinating from the perspective of kind of unconsciously inhabiting this character and then finally realizing like, oh, this is what I was doing, and being able to connect with that and develop a greater understanding of this complicated person.
Yeah.
And also understanding that on some level he contributed to your skill as an actor through that process is kind of amazing.
I wish that I could have told him exactly what you said.
Yeah. He got to see you succeed. He passed away shortly before Next Generation, though. Is that right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And he would have loved Next Generation, particularly that I was Captain Picard. Because he was always a non-commissioned officer, although he became the highest-ranking non-commissioned officer. He was a field marshal of non-commissioned officers.
Yeah, you playing a military officer with great integrity would have appealed to him. Yeah.
It really would. But then, as time went by, I discovered that there was an under-the-covers aspect to Picard as well. And when we came to do the new series Picard, we really examined that, because the writers and directors were very interested in uncovering a man that we had seen almost nothing of. There was one scene in one episode when I screamed, I yelled at a woman, and I threw something at a glass-fronted cocktail cabinet or something, and shattered it. And this was shocking for people. They'd never seen Jean-Luc Picard like this. But I knew how to do it.
Yeah.
And
it's inside you. It was inside you the whole time. Yeah.
It's and there was a price to pay for that.
Yeah.
In rehearsals, I just delved into all of that and put it into the role. By then, I'd had 2 divorces, and I was to blame for both of them.
I watched the first episode of Picard from season 1 the other night, and I was really struck by, there's that scene where you're being interviewed and your buttons get pushed, and then you kind of unleash, right? And it reminded me of, it was very similar to the Jack Nicholson Sorkin scene in A Few Good Men, Colonel Jessup, being provoked just enough to let the lion out, basically your version of saying, you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall. Like, did you order the code red? You're goddamn right, I ordered the code red. Like, that speech that you give is very resonant of, it reminded me of that in there. And it's like that, there's that latent, not necessarily anger, a little self-righteousness earned through experience.
Yeah.
The other kind of example of that for me was when you did when you were Leontes in Winter's Tale, right? Which is kind of a watershed moment in you kind of reckoning with your past.
Yes, it was, and it was very challenging when I read the play. First of all, I'd seen the play and found it interesting, but not. It didn't appeal to me in the way that so much of Shakespeare did. One day, I was in the green room of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. I was working there, and I'd been made this offer of Leontes in The Winter's Tale. And sitting alone at a table was Dame Peggy Ashcroft, whom I didn't know, but she was a member of the company, but I wasn't in the play she was in. And I said, Dame Peg, may I sit by you? And she said, yes, of course, come on, sit down. And we had a chat. And I said, look, I've got to ask you this. I've been offered Leontes in Winter's Tale, and I saw her face change straight away. And I said, I don't know what to do about it. Could you give me any help or advice? And she said, turn it down. Don't do it. Don't do it. He's a bad, bad man, and nobody likes him. The audience don't like him because he's vile to everybody. There's nobody who's on his side, except, of course, there's one good friend whom he kills. And I said to her, thank you. You've articulated what I think I was feeling, so that's great. And then the director said, well, have you made a decision? And I said, yes, I have, and I'm going to pass. And he said, tell me why. So I did. And he said, can we meet just one more time and talk? And so we did. And he said, you see, Patrick, the reason why I'm so determined to have you play this character is that you're not going to have to interpret him. He's already inside you. I know that. I don't know how he knew it.
Yeah, what do you think he saw that made him say that?
I don't know.
But he was a psychologist also, right?
He is,
yeah.
Yes. Yes, he is. Ronald Eyre is his name. And yes, he is. Brilliant, brilliant man. And he said, if you do it, I give you my word. I will never leave your side. Not one moment. I will be there. And he was, too.
Yeah.
And boy, it was hard. It was really hard. But one thing that came out of it, I'm so grateful for, and I looked at it this morning and adjusted it. There is a photo on my desk of Winter's Tale, of me as Leontes and my dear beloved friend Bernard Lloyd. We have been talking to him, and I've been going crazy in the character. And they were taking photos. It was a photo shoot, but they wanted action. They wanted the real play. And in this photograph, he has his hand on my arm, and he's leaning towards me. And there is so much gentleness in his face, so much empathy and sympathy, that when I was first shown that photograph, I knew it was for all time, and it's been on my desk in a frame ever since then, because that became the symbol of what kindness and friendship could mean in a relationship, because I had not been too good at that in my adult life. And then Bernie died, actually it's probably 2 years ago now, and I was with him until quite close to his death. And he was very stiff and hurting, and my wife said, Sonny said, can I just give you a little massage? I think it might help you. And he said, yes, okay. And he stretched out, and she massaged him for half an hour, and then she hugged him, and then I hugged him, and we left. And we got to our car, And we burst into tears, both of us. So that picture of him touching my arm with such kindness is part of my daily life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think what I extracted or took from that story and your experience of doing Winter's Tale was that you have this director who's also a psychologist who identified something in your psyche that needed to come out that would contribute to the performance and make it great and terrifying. And, you know, I know there are stories of people in the audience who felt like we shouldn't even be watching this. It was so intense.
Absolutely.
But from a psychologist's point of view, it's almost ingenious that it was a form of therapy for you to connect with that part, to realize that that piece of your dad is inside of you, or there's that unhealed, pain that resides inside of you from that experience growing up that still required you to reckon with it and look at it. And perhaps that was a piece in the puzzle that led you towards therapy and kind of making peace with this that has, on some level, healed those wounds.
That's very true. And it was something that I could absorb into my work, into my acting, and my approach to bringing a role to life. Albie's great play, I think the great American play of the 20th century, I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, he wrote a play called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Sure.
And I got to play George, the husband. It's a couple, two couples, a husband and wife who are middle-aged, and a young married couple.
With a tinge of alcoholism sprinkled in.
Oh, Lord, yes. So much liquor in that. And I had some experience of that too. But my two broken marriages, I realized, gave me a profound sense of what had been going on inside me during that time when the marriages were breaking up, and that I could absorb them into George. I have another photograph that sits on my desk, and it is, because it's going to be in the book when the photographs are put into the book, it will be there.
Yeah, I've just got the galley here, so I don't even have the final one. It's not out yet.
It's quite a collection of photographs. It will surprise people, which is good.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that, especially my childhood photographs. But in this one, I'm playing George, and it's a scene when Martha, his wife, actually isn't on the stage. It's a scene in the last act of the play. And I was wearing a wig, thinning hair, but some of the hair was dangling over my forehead, and my head is down, and I look so depressed and fearful. And I know that was authentic because I was able to tap into those feelings that I had. When I was getting my first divorce and we were living apart and I went to bed at night, and this is the only time this has ever happened for me, I was in so much terror that my legs sweated. Just my legs, nothing else at all. Wow. And I've heard that can happen, but it was an indication of what was inside me. Well, one of the great joys, including Captain Jean-Luc Picard, is that having to immerse yourself into someone else can be so rich in lessons and learning and understanding and getting closer to other people as well.
Yeah. Well, it breeds empathy. You're literally walking a mile in someone else's shoes.
Yes.
And it changes your view of humanity, I suspect.
That's right.
Yeah.
When I was doing Macbeth, I did it for exactly 365 days, the first and the last performance. Wow. For a whole year, I played that guy. I lived that guy. And it became not good for me. I mean, for one thing, I began drinking only when the show was over. Too much, way too much. And his depressions and ferocity and despair towards the end of the play would begin to envelop me more and more as the evening or matinee days, when we'd do it twice, wore on. And it became difficult.
How do you create healthy boundaries around that so it doesn't seep in? And I guess it sounds like that's been a challenge for you. If you end up, drinking a little bit too much and, walking around brooding on this character that you're inhabiting.
I've learned, and Sonny, my wife, has helped me with this, that when I've finished a day on the set, it doesn't happen that often with filming, but it can do. But certainly when I come home from playing a stage role, I deliberately let it go. Let it go. I mean, this is the gesture that I use. Shake it out. Whew, now I can go home and have some supper and not be in absolute fucking misery.
Well,
because
it also
it's what I was.
Has to be an insane high to do that every night, and then you're supposed to just go home and go to bed when your hormones are going crazy because you've just done this endurance event, this artistic endurance event, in real time in front of a live audience who then receives you, and you're feeling that energy of the crowd, and then you're supposed to just go to sleep after that. Like, I don't know how that works. And I'm always amazed at Broadway actors who just get up every night or sometimes twice a night and do that for incredibly long stretches. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I have a limit now on how long I can do a play for, particularly if it's a play that I know is going to be sucking me in.
What's interesting is before the podcast, you were sharing about how you just recorded the audiobook for this, and you said that was one of, if not the most difficult things that you've done as a performer.
No question, most difficult.
Compared to being on Broadway every night or 20-hour days on Star Trek?
But I've already told you why. I'm being myself.
That's really hard. Yeah.
I wrote it. And I had no intention of reading out loud, recording it when I wrote it. Oh,
come on. Of course you're going to read your audiobook.
Believe me, it came as a shock. When my agent
with your
called
voice, you think somebody else is going to voice you in your autobiography?
I don't listen to audiobooks. I've never heard an audiobook. I've never recorded one before. I mean, people keep saying, you ought to do it. It can be fun and, it's interesting. No, I never wanted to do it. And so it was in my contract, and it was only when I got around to reading the contract in detail that I saw that I was also committing to an audiobook. But Simon Schuster, and particularly Christina, the producer that I work with on the audiobook, has been fantastic. I can only do about 2 hours. I've once or twice gotten close to 3, and I've once wrapped after an hour because it just destroyed me, wore me out doing it. It's so difficult. I met 2 actors who said, let's give you a warning. If you've never done an audiobook before, it is the hardest work you'll ever do. And I said, but you're sitting down with a microphone a few inches. How can that be hard? They said, well, if you do it, you wait and see.
I think people would be aghast if you didn't end up voicing the audiobook to this. It just would not be right.
Well, I'm doing it every morning, and that's one of the reasons why my voice is a little gravelly, because I don't know what it is. It's what I'm putting into the morning's work and I only ever stop recording when I think it's time for my voice to be rested.
Well, you sound great. You mentioned friendship a little bit earlier. That photograph that's on your desk, which leads me to my curiosity around your friendship with Ian McKellen. Which I think we can all agree this is friend goals for all of us. Like, it's such a beautiful relationship that you have with this person. It motivated me to go on the internet and kind of find pictures of him as a young man, because you describe him as there's a mythos around who this person was, even when he was young, many decades ago, that just portrays him as larger than life. And sure enough, I mean, the images of him as a young man are just absolutely striking.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But he was somebody who was very intimidating to everybody, somebody everybody knew was going to be on the rise. And I think there's this idea that the two of you had been friends from the get-go, but that is not the case.
No. I first met him at the Royal Shakespeare Company, but we never worked together. Only some years later, we worked once. We did a Tom Stoppard play called Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, EGBDF. Mm-hmm. And Ian was in it. And I was very shy of him.
What was it about him?
It was the way he listened when you talked to him. Because Ian is known as a talker himself. But he is a wonderful listener. And I talked to him about things I'd never talked to another man about before.
Yeah. You said that you blame him for turning you into a child again. What does that mean?
Well, I became silly and adventurous and playful, and because he is, he's got a great sense of humor and a great sense of irony, particularly. And so EGBDF was one thing, and John Wood and Ian McKellen were the two leading actors. I just simply played a psychiatrist. I should be so lucky. And Ian, I don't know how to. I've tried. I've sat in front of my computer for a long time, sometimes thinking about Ian and the affection that I have for him and what he gave me when we worked together and when I watched him work on stage. And now in our friendship, it's as close to a love affair as I shall ever have with a man.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but if you Google Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, one of the first things that pops up is this question: is Ian McKellen married to Patrick Stewart? But there's actually a really funny story behind that. Do you know what I'm referring to? Yeah. So at one point, yourself, Ian, and Hugh Jackman all appear on the Graham Norton show, right. And yeah. Ian announces that he is going to marry you. Oh. So there's what he actually meant, and there's how that was interpreted.
Yeah, that's right. He was the priest at our wedding, and he had been qualified, and so far as I know, Sonny and I were the only couple he married, although he had multiple offers once the word got around that he was...
I have no doubt. Yeah, so he ends up marrying you. I guess you were going to get married in Nevada, but there was a pesky state law around his ministry, his sort of legal...
That's right. It was not recognized in Nevada. And so we would go through a mockery of a wedding.
So I think as I understood the story, you were in Lake Tahoe. You were going to get married on the Nevada side, but he wasn't legally permitted to do that. So you all crossed the border into California and did an impromptu ceremony in a Mexican restaurant.
In a Mexican restaurant at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
and
just like a small group of you, right?
Yeah. There were 5 of us. So we had witnesses too, and it was extraordinary.
Let's talk about Star Trek.
What?
Do you remember that part of your life? It's got to be a blur, though. Most of it's got to be one big blur.
Oh, yes. We recorded over...
how many seasons? Chris Swan will know.
7 seasons. Yeah. We did something like 174 episodes.
Uh-huh.
And there are only a handful of them, I remember.
Yeah.
The rest have just all gone into the melting pot. But there are some vivid recollections I do have of certain episodes and certain actors that I worked with, and what that meant to me, and the fact that I was getting a break in popular TV.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this was a big deal. You were. I think it was it LeVar Burton who put a sign on your door that said something like "Beware, unknown British Shakespearean actor inside." Like, this was your introduction. I mean, you went from being this, just a theater person into the public consciousness very quickly. And the story behind how you got Star Trek, which you go into in detail in the book, is super fascinating. I know Ian told you not to do it. He was trying to talk you out of it.
Yep, he did. He was the only one who did.
He's apologized for that.
He has said he was wrong.
I think it's interesting and interesting to try to understand what makes Star Trek such a special idea that has left such an indelible kind of mark on our culture, and why it continues to persist and be so popular.
I think the strongest thing is that it is a vision of the future, and it is a positive, hopeful vision of the future. Oh yes, dreadful things have happened in Star Trek, but behind Gene Roddenberry's motivation for creating the first series and then coming to work with us was that he wanted to leave behind a sense of positivity and hopefulness and confidence. And it's the one thing that he talked about with me. Actually, what he said was, I had lunch with him. We only had 2 meals together because we didn't have actually much in common. He played a lot of golf, and I don't play any golf at all.
Well, the first meeting with him didn't go so well, right? He did not want you for the role.
It was a disaster. And he hadn't invited me. It was my encounter with, Robert Justman had come to UCLA to see a public lecture which an actress and myself were illustrating with extracts from plays, Shakespeare plays. And he'd seen it, and he went back to the office the next morning, and he said, we found our captain. And they said, well, what are you talking about? And they said, and Gene Roddenberry said, oh, well, get him in this morning. Let's have a look at him if you think he's that good. And so that I got the phone call at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was in Gene's office at 11 o'clock that day. And he got out of his chair. There were 2 other men in the room, including Robert Justman, who was the man who had been to see the play the night before and was blown away by it. Gene stood up and shook my hand. And then we talked for 7 or 8 minutes. And then Gene said, all right, thank you very much for coming to see us. And thank you.
That's that.
Goodbye. And I left, kind of relieved, actually, that I was out of this weird atmosphere. But 6 months later, I was cast.
Did you have misgivings about being this highbrow Shakespearean actor and dipping your toes into network television at the time?
I didn't know what I was doing. I'd been in
You've done
TV.
Stuff. Yeah.
I mean, some of it. I, Claudius, the great BBC series based on the 2 famous novels, I, Claudius and Claudius the God. I'd been in that. I'd done a series about a policeman, which only lasted 1 season. And occasionally little bits of plays would turn up. But it was not a career for me. And I actually wasn't that interested. Really. The theater was what I loved. Performance, being on stage night after night after night. And that changed.
Yeah, you really came to embrace every aspect of it.
Yes. Yeah. And I love it today.
Yeah.
Film and television. And I'm worried that I may never get to do it again.
I think you're going to get to do some more.
Really?
Yeah. I think you got a little more in you. I think when I think about Star Trek, I grew up with the original Star Trek, Captain Kirk, Spock, and all of that. And yes, there is a beautiful optimism to it. Perhaps not utopian, but optimistic enough, which I think serves as a contrast to most science fiction. But also, it's always been a show that has been fearless in terms of grappling with social issues. Like, that's always been at the core of what the show is about. It gives you an opportunity through allegory to explore things that are going on in culture currently that we're struggling with. I
have to say, and this will sound unkind to maybe those who hear this, working with Gene Roddenberry was not easy. I mean, he never directed an episode. He was the executive producer.
Did every big decision had to get run through him?
Oh, yes.
As the creator?
Absolutely, yes. I was very unconfident. In fact, when I started writing the memoir, I thought, the people are really going to want to hear me go on and on and on about Star Trek and maybe X-Men too, and I don't think I want to. That's not the most interesting part of my career. I mean, that is a shocking thing to say, because it's assumed, of course, that it is. And I think that, throughout that first season, I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand television technique. I'd never had a class in television. In my drama school, we didn't do film and TV work at all, because nobody was expected to get it, because they were just film actors, and there wasn't that much television either. And then I was determined that I would do better. And I knew, even when I first saw it, that the best thing that I was doing in the first season was space, the final frontier. That I got really good at. And why? Because I copied exactly what Bill had said.
Bill Shatner.
Bill Shatner, yes.
But the thing that's striking is, when you're on the bridge, there is a theatricality to that in a very practical sense. It is a stage. There's entrances and exits, and you're literally sitting on a throne.
Yes.
So there is a parallel that I imagine, as a stage actor, you were able to connect with and tap into. I mean, it's very Elizabethan.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And as it became more and more like that, I began to feel more and more comfortable. My first film was, it's in the book, was 2 afternoons or 2 mornings' work in a film starring Rod Steiger. Rod Steiger was one of my childhood heroes. I'd seen the Pawnbroker. I'd seen
On the Waterfront.
On the Waterfront, yes, and absolutely loved them. And so learning that I was that this was my first ever day in front of a film camera, he said, "What are you doing for lunch?" And I said, I don't know. What do you do for lunch on a film set? He said, "Oh, you go there and you order your lunch and they'll give it to you. Bring it to my trailer." Wow. Rod Steiger is inviting me into his trailer. The man who said, "Take the job. Take the job."
Right.
In
Legend.
the back of that car with Rod and
Brando.
Brando.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the real kicker to that story, though, is it not the fact that you shot a scene in the back of the car with Rod Steiger for this movie.
Yeah.
I think you had to shoot him. And they were shooting all of his coverage.
Yeah.
And then when they finished that, they said lunch, and then he threw a fit.
Yeah. Well, they said, what they actually said was they did do all of Bill's coverage, some of which I was in, and then they said, "Okay, that's all we need of you, Bill. You can go to lunch now."
Right. Rod, you mean?
Rod, yeah. And we were sitting side by side in the back of this car. I hadn't actually shot him or killed him. No, I didn't get to do that. he said, what about Patrick? And they said, oh, don't worry about that. We'll have somebody read in for you and it'll all be fine. And there was a long silence. And I could feel this heat growing on one side of me. And he said, what the fuck do you think I am? I mean, his voice going up, and then he went for this assistant stage manager, and said, "You think I'm going to leave him now? He's all done my lines, and I'm going to leave him to do his own." And anyway, it was, and then that was when he said, "I'm sorry about." He apologized to me, and I said, "No, that was fine." And he invited me to his trailer, and he said, "The camera photographs thoughts." No one had ever said that to me before. I mean, that's the very heart of the method, of which he was a pupil. I mean, he studied just like Brando did.
So you carrying that onto the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, that sensibility of the camera can read your thoughts, and also a leadership role as the captain sitting in the throne, remembering that Rod Steiger did what he did for this young actor doing his first movie. Like that's a lesson, right? Like this is how you, this is, you know, it's not right. Like, and if you're the lead in a project, the tone is being set by how you comport yourself, right? And understanding that you're now carrying that responsibility.
Exactly, and it's one of the reasons why I love playing the leading role. Yeah. Because I feel that I can help to give the other actors the best possible experience they could have. And I will always say, there are no number one actors. We're an ensemble. We work together. And I do remember one of the things Rod said to me while on this lunchtime was, whoever is talking, he's the lead. Whoever is. And that was amazing for an actor who only had half a dozen lines.
He didn't have to do that.
No, he didn't. He was being kind and generous, and oh boy!
And then you ran into him many years later, right?
Years later, and I was in New York. No, I was here in Los Angeles, and I was, I think, already working on Star Trek. And I went to this restaurant, and we were looking around. It was very busy, and there he was, sitting at a table with 3 other friends. And I said to Sonny, oh my God, there's Rod Steiger over there. And she said, go and say hello. Go on. I said, okay. He won't know who the hell I am. It was years ago. So I went over. And before I got to the table, he said, Patrick, and stood up. And it was one of the best memories of my career.
The gift that keeps giving.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Beautiful. I need to know about the paranormal activity that was happening in your Silver Lake house that you talk about in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like you were getting visited by ghosts.
Yeah. I bought a house on Moreno Drive in Silver Lake. One evening, I came home. It was, the floors were staggered down a steep hillside. And so the door from the garage led straight into the master bedroom. And one night, I locked up the car, pulled down the door, opened the bedroom door, and the smell of cooking was intense. And I thought, I must have left the oven on last night, or why didn't I smell it? God. So I hurried downstairs. Nothing. Just the smell of cooking in the air and nothing else at all. And then it took on from there. Footsteps on the stairs. Voices in rooms where there was nobody. I came home one day. My son had been staying with me. He went to school here. I got home, and he said, oh, thank God you're home. And I said, why? What, is something wrong? He said, let me show you. And we went into my sitting room where I had a lot of bookshelves, and all the books were scattered across the floor. And I said, what have you been doing? He said, I didn't do anything. I was watching television, and suddenly all these books were thrown into the middle of the floor. Pardon?
No earthquake.
No earthquake, no. And there was a place in the hallway which I used to go through the house, starting on the ground floor, and then work through my house, turning lights off and all that. Because my television room was right on the ground floor, on the lowest deck of the house. And when I got to the middle floor, which was the kitchen, the living room, and the dining room, and so forth, I walked to the foot of the stairs, and just before I reached the stairs, I always walked through this icy zone. It was just the temperature instantly plummeted, and I got to the 1 foot on the step, and it was gone. I rented the house when after 3 years I moved somewhere else, and I got a family moved into it, and they were lovely people. And one day they called me to ask about, I don't know, there was a problem with a washing machine or something that had gone wrong, and so we had a little chat, and then just as she was about to hang up, she said, "Oh, by the way, Patrick, there was something I wanted to ask you. You didn't tell us everything that came with your house." They were having it worse than I was. And the child, exactly on this spot where I used to feel the temperature plummet, saw a man standing there. And I found out about him. I became very close to my neighbors next door. They'd lived there for decades. And they said, yes. Well, that was a man who died in a car accident, actually. Ooh. Very violent car accident.
Who had lived in that house?
Yes.
What do you make of all this?
Well, that's only one experience that I've had. I've been in other places when I've just had, Sonny and I were looking for a house in England, and we went into one, and it was empty. All the furniture had been taken out, but it was very, very old, 15th, 16th century. And we were going along, there was a long corridor in the upstairs floor, and there were doors off off the corridor into the rooms. And I went into one room, and as I got into the middle of the room, I felt hands around my throat. And I cried out, "Help, help!" And Sonny came in and ran into the room and got hold of me and dragged me out. I was being strangled in that room.
Oh, my God.
The first time I saw it, I was 12 years old in a neighbor's house, and
so this is a recurring thing.
I think I have some kind of openness, some kind of sensitivity that maybe it's history. I don't know, but I feel that I do hear voices occasionally. And
what do you choose to interpret from that? What is your sense of
that I'm tuned in to the afterworld,
and that there's no mistake or irony in you being an actor who plays a character who goes and visits with aliens all over the galaxy?
I don't know. Maybe there is.
Come on. And then you turn on the TV, and there's congressional hearings on UFOs and UAPs.
That's right.
There's a convergence happening right now.
That's
what is going on, Patrick?
There is. It's extraordinary. And things being seen more and more in the sky. Yeah. I just hope that whatever happens while I'm still here.
Yeah. I got to let you go shortly here, but there's two more things I want to touch on quickly. The first thing is you're a bit of an animal welfare advocate. There's a couple squirrels that appear and reappear in this book. You have an incident at a bullfighting match that seems like it was impactful. And I know you do a lot of work with dogs, particularly pit bulls.
Yeah.
So where does that sense for animal well-being come from?
I had a dog when my father bought me a dog not long after he came out of the war. The dog's name was Rover, and he was a thoroughbred Scottish collie, a Scottish sheepdog. He was black and white, very classical dog, and I loved this guy. He was wonderful. We had him a long, long time, and then he had to be taken and put down. He was very ill. But I never forgot that, and when I made contact by this Wags and Walks in Los Angeles, it opened all that up again, and so we began fostering dogs, Sonny and myself, and it was wonderful.
How many dogs do you have?
I think in total we fostered 7, only one at a time, never more than that.
Gotcha.
And we only, I mean, the shortest we had, one of them was 2 days. And the very first one we had was an extraordinary dog, beautiful, sensitive. It would look you right straight into the eyes and cock its head on one side. And I could feel him trying to connect with me, you know. And it's so I do what I can to help the ones who need help, and you know.
You've lived just an absolutely extraordinary life, and you know you did a wonderful job with the book. It's wildly entertaining. It's a very difficult book to put down. The stories are just absolutely legendary. So well done in that regard. I love it, and I know you're about to embark on quite the book tour. So you're going to be doing a lot of media stuff. I guess you know I'm curious about what it is that you want people to take from the book, but also just your life. Like, what is instructive about the experiences that you've had and the lessons that you've learned as you reflect back as an 83-year-old man on what's important, what's not, and maybe even a guiding principle or two that we could incorporate into our own lives?
Well, they come down to things that I am still working on. And it's awkward being a leading actor on television and film. But being brave, being open, being sensitive to other people, tuning into them, becomes more and more and more important to me. And I find that in the close friends that I have, that is their relationship with me too, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. I wish I could go back. There are things I would like to say to my parents and my brothers, both of them, that I never said. And that makes me very, very sad that I never told them what they gave me.
But this gives you an opportunity to at least say it publicly. Yeah,
it kind of does. Yes, yeah. I mean, my first draft of this book was over 700 pages, and it's now about 440. So people are saying, "So, what are you going to write next?" And I say, No. There's no next. This is it. This is it. And then the other day I thought, well, maybe I could find that draft that's got 350 words in it that are not in my book.
The director's cut.
The director's cut, yeah.
To your point, that was beautifully shared. Thank you. There's a section in the book that I found quite moving, which was about your relationship with vulnerability as an actor and how that's a tool and a vehicle for unlocking truth, but also as a way of being in the world, right? The power that comes with allowing yourself to be vulnerable on stage, but also with the people that you care about.
Yes. That's perhaps the primary objective in my life now.
To be vulnerable with those you care about.
Yes.
I think that's a beautiful place to end it. Thank you.
You're
an international gift to humanity. I just wanted to recognize you for the work that you do, of course, and this beautiful book that you're putting out into the world. I wish you much success with it. But really how you comport yourself as a man in the world. Like, I find it to be extremely aspirational, and the way that you are so open-hearted and and earnest with your feelings and your friendships, I think is a guidepost for someone like myself. So thank you for that, and I loved having the opportunity to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you. I've messed up at times.
We all have,
and I hold on to them. I don't let them go. I don't let them control me, of course, but they're there, and that was part of who I have been. And in a little tiny way still is. And so that helps me to reinforce the close relationships that I already have. They're so important.
I hope that you can find a little bit more grace and forgiveness for yourself. I think you owe that to yourself.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for that last comment.
Yeah.
And with that,
let's get you
I think
back
I have
on
to
the
say au revoir.
Thank you, sir. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed the conversation. To learn more about today's guest, including links and resources related to everything discussed today, visit the episode page at richroll.com, where you can find the entire podcast archive, as well as podcast merch, my books, Finding Ultra, Voicing Change in the Plant Power Way, as well as the Plant Power Meal Planner at meals.richroll.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest and most impactful thing you can do is to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube, and leave a review and or comment. Supporting the sponsors who support the show is also important and appreciated. And sharing the show or your favorite episode with friends or on social media is, of course, awesome and very helpful. And finally, for podcast updates, special offers on books, the meal planner, and other subjects, please subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find on the footer of any page at richroll.com. Today's show was produced and engineered by Jason Camiolo, with additional audio engineering by Cale Curtis. The video edition of the podcast was created by Blake Curtis, with assistance by our creative director, Dan Drake. Portraits by Davey Greenberg. Graphic and social media assets courtesy of Daniel Solis. Thank you, Georgia Whaley, for copywriting and website management. And of course, our theme music was created by Tyler Pyatt, Trapper Pyatt, and Harry Mathis. Appreciate the love the support. See you back here soon. Peace. Plants. Namaste.